Howdy! Come one, come all! The sheriff is in town today. This feller doesn't get enough credit where it's due. He has been above snakes for years, fighting the deadliest zombies of Badlands, including the gunslinger himself. Since the sheriff always has bounties to deal with, he constantly gets racks upon racks for whatever this man does. It's always thrilling to see who is next on the sheriff's wanted list. Wait a dang minute. Shoot! How do they figure out about me? Sheriff, please! I can explain, this is all a misunderstanding!
Did you know that the Cowboy was added to Tower Defense Simulator almost 5 years ago? Wow, that makes me feel so old. There is no denying that the Cowboy has been one of the most influential towers for all of TDS history. I believe that it could arguably be as impactful as the Gladiator to the game. I mean, both towers came out at roughly the same time and were both trailblazers for further greatness to come. Ever since the Cowboy was released, the changes applied to this tower have been all over the place. For example, the method in which you obtain the Cowboy went past multiple updates before having to beat Badlands 2. With each update came plenty of buffs and nerfs applied to the Cowboy over time. The community's opinions on Cowboy have fluctuated greatly, which has led up to what it is today. Each update the Cowboy got felt like an event to the fanbase. This came with lots of hypes and controversy around whether the Cowboy was really worth it or not. So, how deep does this rabbit hole truly go? How many changes has the Cowboy been through at this point? Will there ever be an Arthur Morgan skin for Cowboy? Oh, you think I'm kidding? We need a Red Dead Redemption collab now! Jokes aside, it is time to take out our history books, because today we are flipping to Chapter 1 of the Cowboy. During the summer, on June 24th of 2019, Tower Defense Simulator recently popped into the scene of Roblox games in its beta. With this game, they had many further updates prepared after its initial release. The first update up Paradoxum Sleeves was the legendary Sword Fight on the Heights event, which was a massive success throughout the community. After the release, 5 days go by and a new tower is added to the game. This tower was none other than the Cowboy himself. When the Cowboy was added, the developers wanted to do a bit of experimenting with it. The way to obtain the Cowboy was unlike any tower in the game up to this point. In order to get the Cowboy, a map known as Badlands was required to be beaten first. Badlands, or as I like to call it, Bald Lands, goes back in time to the Wild West in an old-fashioned town settled in deserted mountains. The difficulty of Badlands was ranked at insane. Inside this map, there are 2 separate lanes where the zombies spawn upon. Both lanes begin from opposite sides of the map, which follow along to intersect right near its exit. What made Badlands a lot tougher was that the amount of zombies every wave doubled compared to your average map for each entrance. Even the freaking final boss would spawn on both sides. Now that's just bull. So, what was the best way to actually beat Badlands and get the Cowboy? Well, most people will place their towers where the intersection crosses to attack all the enemies at once. This makes the best use of the tower placement limit, so players do not need as many towers placed on each path separately. To have the greatest success at winning, loads of beefy towers were needed, such as the Ranger, Turret, Minigunner, and Mortar. For buffs, having Commander and John were essential for beating Badlands to maximize the damage output on the huge apocalypse of enemies. After shedding the blood, sweat, and tears to beat Badlands, you will finally be rewarded the Cowboy once and for all. Now that the Cowboy has been obtained, let's take a look at the stats of this tower to see how to properly utilize it. For starters, the Cowboy can be bought at a placement cost of $500 to afford one at the start of a match. Something to keep in mind for the earlier versions of Cowboy is that he originally did not gain any money from shooting enemies. There used to be a different way that the Cowboy gained profit, which we will touch on later. The damage starts off decent at 2 damage every 1.7 seconds with 9 range. Compared to a tower like Scout, this level of Cowboy is only a slightly better version of it, having only 0.23 more DPS than Scout. Level 1 is no exception to that. Cowboy only gains 3 more range, similar to the Scout gaining 2 range. However, it is important to note that this provides Cowboy with hidden detection very early on for only $350. Level 2 is a solid upgrade to Cowboy's DPS for only $525. The damage increases to 4 and the fire rate decreases to 1.25, tallying up to be a DPS of 3.2. For level 3, Cowboy's damage increases to 8, fire rate decreases to 1.05, and the range increases to 14. This is probably the most ideal level to get your Cowboys to, because getting a DPS of 7.62 for the overall price of $2,725 is a steal if you ask me. For $4,250, level 4 is another highlight for the Cowboy. Again, the damage gets an increase to 16 and the fire rate decreases to 0.7, tripling the DPS from level 3 to 22.86. Well, hot darn! Lastly, getting to level 5 is where the real magic happens. First off, Cowboy's revolver transforms into a Gatling gun, dealing 7 damage at the expense of the fire rate decreasing all the way to 0.2. This gives us a final DPS of 35 for a total price of $14,475 of all the levels added up. But that's not all, folks. On this level, Cowboy acquires a special ability called Gold Rush. Earlier, I mentioned that there was a different way that Cowboy used to gain cash. This is what I meant by that. When activated, this ability will last 10 seconds, providing the Cowboy a 4% chance to drop a money bag containing $25 to $400 in it. To put the cherry on top, the damage of Cowboy would rise up by 65%, making his DPS go from 35 to a solid 57.75. In comparison, that used to be 13.31 more DPS than a level 5 minigunner. Having this paired up with Commander was such a good combo with their abilities. Looking back at the Cowboy as a whole, this tower really stood out among the rest of the towers in the game at the time. The Cowboy was the second tower ever to be obtained from completing a map, right after the Gladiator. There were only a few select towers that had an ability which turned Cowboy into a pioneer for further abilities to come. The true downside that this tower experienced was its usage in the early game. For the most part, this tower invented a strong start to a meta that will continue to grow as time goes by. Only 2 days go by since the Cowboy was released, and he already receives a big change to the way you obtain him. At first, Badlands was the sole map used to beat and earn the Cowboy from. Now, with this update, a new map called End of the Line gets added to the game for a second way to get the Cowboy. How did End of the Line compare to Badlands? Unlike Badlands, the difficulty on End of the Line cooled down to normal instead of insane. End of the Line took place in another deserted western town where the enemies would walk upon railroad tracks. Let's not forget about the pits of lava spread throughout the map. Wait, why are there giant pits of lava? What does this game think it is? Minecraft? The whole point behind implementing another way to obtain the Cowboy was because Paradoxum thought that Badlands might be too hard for newer players. However, Paradoxum realized that when End of the Line was added into the game, everybody was switching over to it instead of Badlands because of how much easier it was to get Cowboy. This led Badlands to be heavily overshadowed by End of the Line while it was in the game. After being in the game for a little more than 2 weeks, the Cowboy received his first ever buff. The main problem the Cowboy was having ever since his release was his power in the early game, but with this buff, it really delivered for Cowboy. What he got was a huge addition to his damage for each of his levels, especially in the early game. The damage for every one of Cowboy's levels increases by 2. This rework might not seem like much at face value, but this made the tower absolutely brutal. The 2 levels that got the best glow up were level 0 and level 5. For level 0, the Cowboy's base cost was increased to $650 instead of $500 to compensate for the upgrade. The rise in cost worked out really well because in return, the damage for Cowboy is now 4 every 1.7 seconds, doubling his DPS from 1.18 to 2.35. That was equivalent to that of about 2.5 scouts at the time. For level 5, the fire rate stayed the same at a solid 0.2 seconds. However, the damage buff from 7 to 9 makes a big difference to the DPS. From this addition, the max level DPS went from 35 to 45. A whole 10 DPS gets added to the final DPS altogether. Combining this with the Gold Rush ability, the Cowboy goes from 45 DPS to a staggering 74.25 DPS. Nothing can stop this tower now. People started to realize how overpowered the Cowboy has become, and everyone would make it their mission to get this tower now. This made End of the Line and Badlands very popular maps to play, almost making it essential to get the Cowboy in Tower Defense Simulator. From here on out, the Cowboy kept rising in popularity throughout the game. On October 13th, 2019, one of the biggest updates for Tower Defense Simulator was released. This update was known as the Mega Update, transitioning the game out of its beta with loads of adjustments added to the game. A few noteworthy changes in the Mega Update had a huge effect on the Cowboy. Again, the way you earned Cowboy got switched with this update. This time, the developers just straight up removed End of the Line from the game. There actually used to be images of leaks for a map redesign for End of the Line that was never carried out. But, Cowboy was way too easy to obtain before, so this change was bound to happen eventually. The Cowboy itself also had quite a bit of a nerf applied to him as well. At Cowboy's final level, the ability went from buffing the damage by 65% to buffing it by 30% instead. When the ability is activated, instead of dealing 74.25 DPS, the Cowboy now deals 58.5 DPS. Along with this, the 4% chance of dropping money bags every shot has been completely removed from the ability. It sucks that Cowboy loses a whole 15.75 DPS from this nerf, but this made the tower a lot more balanced compared to other towers such as the minigunner. The money bags were also pretty useful throughout games too, causing the Cowboy to remove the economic feature on it. Overall, the Mega Update has adjusted the Cowboy to be more balanced for the game. The deletion of End of the Line requires players to beat the almighty Badlands to get the Cowboy, which I like a lot better. The nerf on Cowboy was not a huge nerf, but it was another update that was bound to happen. As Tower Defense Simulator continually received fresh updates, they added to the collection of golden skins to the game. When the Golden Crate was first introduced in the Mega Update, there were only 3 skins that could be bought: the Crook Boss, Pyromancer, and Minigunner. Later, the Scout, Soldier, and most importantly, the Cowboy got an addition to the Golden Crate too. Golden Cowboy was implemented into the Golden Crate on January 12, 2020, and the news spread like wildfire throughout the fanbase. Golden skins worked a little differently than they do now in terms of their buffs. The buffs were given by increasing a feature on each level by a percentage. For Golden Cowboy, every level had a 25% increase in damage and a 15% increase in range. To compensate for this buff, each upgrade on Golden Cowboy gains a 25% increase in their cost. By comparing the levels of Cowboy to its golden counterpart, you can see the differences overall between each level with and without the golden buffs. While it lasted, the Golden Cowboy was said to be one of the better golden towers in the game. The main reason for this was because the damage buff made it so a Golden Cowboy could one-shot an abnormal zombie on Fallen mode. With a bunch of these suckers on the field, they could clear the early waves of Fallen like literal machines. This made Golden Cowboy a staple for Fallen mode where everyone, including me, was craving to get this great option for early game. Whew, it's gonna be okay, Sunken. Just stay calm and think positively.
Hi, I'd like to interrupt the situation that's brewing up here. This is clearly SunkenRealm that's being salty at the fact that he did not have Golden Cowboy when it was at its peak era. So, in all honesty, he should have just gotten better. I mean, just like, lock in, low bro. Anyways, we can continue with the video now.
Before we carry on with the history of Cowboy, let's recap and look at the state of Cowboy right now at this point in time. Currently, the Cowboy is known to be a very solid tower in the game right now. With Badlands being the only source of obtaining Cowboy, it has complemented the tower really well as a good challenge for a good tower in return. However, the next update coming up would change everything for Cowboy as we know it. On May 26th, 2020, Tower Defense Simulator cooked up another update for the game called the Smaller Equals Bigger update. A good chunk of this update consisted of tower reworks, including the Cowboy. But this update was not just some typical stat change to the Cowboy, no. A whole new mechanic got added to the tower. What did they apply to the tower? Well, let me introduce you to the cash shot. This stupidly broken feature made it so every time the Cowboy shot, it would have a 12% chance to produce some cash. The amount of cash you get is absolutely insane, clocking in at $60 all the way up to $750 per cash shot. By spamming a bunch of cowboys on the field, they increase the opportunities for piling up more and more money like freaking Jeff Bezos. Even Farm, the tower that is meant for providing you money, could not compete with how much money Cowboy was producing. After this update was released, Cowboy reached its absolute peak in popularity and it strongly solidified itself into the meta. The Cowboy became a valuable contender for the most useful towers in the game, alongside other towers such as the Golden Scout, John, and the recently buffed Gladiator. On the other hand, this next update completely reverses what was going for Cowboy from here. This update was none other than the Overhaul update. Like I've mentioned in my previous videos, the Overhaul update has been the biggest transition Tower Defense Simulator has experienced so far, with additions, removals, and tons of reworks applied to the game. When Cowboy received his rework this update, he went from being one of the most popular early game towers to one of the most forgettable. Here's why. First off, the Cowboy's cash shot mechanic was completely altered in the way you gain money. Instead of obtaining money for a percentage every attack, you would automatically get money after every 5th attack instead. Now, this might sound really good at first since you are pretty much guaranteed to earn money, but the amount of money you get each time decreased all the way from $60 to $750 down to $10 to $100. Listen, I think it used to be way too overpowered to be able to gain all the way up to $750 from the cash shot. However, the developers took this a little too far when changing the max profit to $100. Not to mention, you don't even get cash shots on levels 0 and 1 anymore. Next, the DPS decreased with every single level on Cowboy. Here is a comparison of what Cowboy's DPS was before and after the update. Something to know about the first few levels on the reworked Cowboy is that it can no longer one-shot the normal zombies on Molten Mode, which makes it very inefficient. Cowboy's 5th level also does not come with an ability anymore, further decreasing the DPS even more. By the way, Golden Cowboy is not any better compared to the normal Cowboy. It had almost the same DPS and range. The only good thing about the Golden version is that the cash shot requires 4 attacks instead of 5. This was not worth it at all for the increase in his upgrade prices by 25%. To end this disaster off on a good note, Badlands received a very cool remake to the map as a whole. The quality was way better than before while containing its challenge. To obtain the Cowboy, the difficulty now was required for it to be Fallen mode only. Since the Cowboy got a massive downgrade, many people were turning out of Badlands on Fallen mode for a below average tower. Everyone thought this nerf was ridiculous and that Cowboy deserved to get a buff. People would still play Badlands just to add the Cowboy to their collection, but it was barely used. Unfortunately, this major nerf would be here to stay for the next 2 years. Since this nerf on Cowboy left a curse upon Paradoxum Games, they realized that action needed to be done upon this tower to recover it out of its current state. Many plans of action needed to be sorted out. A big project needs to be released in order to bring this tower back. What was this idea? Welcome to the Wanted Dead update. Behind the scenes, Paradoxum Games has been consistently working into a whole new world for the Cowboy. They went out of their way to delete Badlands and recreate it into a sequel. The Cowboy has gotten another rework with several new skins added. Time to take a ride on this roller coaster of content. When playing Badlands 2, a huge amount of differences are seen straight from the get-go. First of all, there are no longer 2 paths that the enemies come from. There are actually freaking 3! You do not really have a choice but to put towers where the paths intersect or else you will lose. This update was the first to apply the new modifier system into the game. Badlands 2 introduces multiple modifiers involved in this update, including mutations that increase the health of enemies each wave, and the Badlands exclusive modifier, changing a few of the enemies into their western variants. Some enemies only found in Badlands 2 were the Husks instead of the Fallens, the Undead Miners instead of the Fallen Heroes, and the Cavalry instead of the Fallen Guardians. Wave 40 is within reach, and the final draw is about to commence between the Gunslinger himself. This tough guy has a crap ton of health, clocking in at 600,000. You are going to need a whole lot of DPS if you want to beat this guy, such as accelerators, engineers, and golden minigunners. The gunslinger looks dangerous with his revolver, but believe me, he gets much worse when he pulls out a shotgun, plus the machine gun armed inside the coffin on his back to stun your towers. That sounds like fun! Once the gunslinger gets lowered down to half health, he will do a loud shout to lower the range of all nearby towers by 50% and start charging faster towards the base. The gunslinger will get very up close and personal to your base, so in order to get the best chances of survival, replacing towers to the back is an effective way to keep the DPS going. After all your effort pays off, the gunslinger will finally meet his match and Badlands is saved. This is the new way that Cowboy is awarded to you along with some stacked cash. There is also a secret badge that Paradoxum Games added to the game where if you beat Badlands 2 in under 18 minutes, you will obtain a secret skin for the Cowboy and a badge to go along with it. By the way, this is like the best Cowboy skin in the game, and I don't have it, so I'm jealous. So, let's see how this new Cowboy really holds up right now. With this rework, literally everything about the Cowboy got changed. His design, his DPS, his cast shots, and his range. Let's take a look at his cast shots first, because this was one of the main factors that got changed. Before this update, the cast shot would be acquired automatically every time the required shots were reached. Now, every time the Cowboy reaches the cast shot, it has a spin time to wait on the money, stopping the damage produced. This takes a bit of a toll on the DPS when facing a ton of enemies. Also, there is no longer a range from $10 to $100 that is gained from the cast shot. Instead, a cast shot provides a set amount of money that is increased per level. With that said, let's move on to the new stats for each of Cowboy's levels. It is important to note that the base price of Cowboy has now been decreased to $550, which is great because you can actually place a Cowboy at the very beginning of a match. The DPS for the early levels pretty much stay the same from the previous update, with the base DPS having 2 damage every second instead of 3 damage every 1.5 seconds. For every level, the cast shot required is 6 to match the decreased fire rate. From the base Cowboy, you will gain $25 for the cast shot, which is okay, but isn't absolutely broken like before. To pair up with this, the new spin time mechanic starts off at 1.7 seconds and occurs each cast shot. As the Cowboy levels up, the amount of money earned increases as the spin time decreases, overall increasing the production of cash from the Cowboy. When shifting our focus to the Golden Cowboy, the base price is now $700, which cannot be placed at the beginning of a match. However, I think that it is worth it since the Golden Cowboy gets around a 50% increase in damage over the normal Cowboy's upgrades. One part of the Golden Cowboy buff that I do not like is the tiny raise in money per cash shot. I mean, just look at these graphs. Each raise in cash feels like the pay of minimum wage. Although this is true, I still feel like the Golden Cowboy is the better option over the normal Cowboy since the DPS is a whole lot higher. However, since the normal Cowboy has cheaper levels than the Golden Cowboy, it could make for a better option in producing some cash. But that's just a theory. When looking back on the Wanted Dead update, this added a lot more character to Badlands and a mighty challenge for obtaining Cowboy. Although the long-awaited rework for Cowboy finally has arrived, I feel like Cowboy is still just an average tower in the game. I don't think his DPS is that crazy, but his cast shot does come quite in handy. There is no doubt that the Wanted Dead update had one of the most monumental effects on shaping the Cowboy today. After the recent buff to Cowboy, I don't think that he or Badlands 2 are going to be receiving much more changes. Paradoxum pushed out a few big fixes that needed to be addressed, mainly dealing with decreasing the placement cost, increasing the DPS, and revamping the cast shots. The state of both Cowboy and Badlands are in solid positions on the game currently. Once again, the Cowboy has provided a major influence to Tower Defense Simulator and its history with each update. I find it insanely astonishing how the Cowboy has been through so much development over the past few years, whether it be its tower stats, the way you obtain it, or any other regards toward the tower. If there is anything to take away from this video, just remember that the Cowboy's impact upon this game will never be forgotten.
Killer fish from San Diego. San Diego, San Diego. Killer fish food, San Diego, San Diego, San Diego. Killer fish, San